Welcome to today's episode of Hard Times and True Crimes. We're going back to the early 1970s, to a small town called Searcy, nestled in the heart of Arkansas. You can probably picture it, a community where the streets are lined with mom and pop shops, neighbors gathered for Sunday services, and the pace of life was as steady as the hum of the front porch swing. It had that small town vibe that brings to mind the fictional town Stars Hollow, except with a southern charm. A place where folks felt secure in the comfort of knowing everybody around them. Yet, even in this era of law and order, residents still remembered the murder of Ruby Stapleton, a beloved English professor at Harding College in 1963. She had been abducted from a local laundromat and her body found later in some woods near the BB community. That murder remained unsolved, casting a long shadow over Searcy. So when the authorities were called to the home of an affluent local doctor, one from whom the local hospital was named, people wondered if this case would turn out the same.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes. Okay, Melody, so are you ready for your trivia question of the day?
I am. I hope it's an easy one.
Mine was pretty easy last time.
Yeah.
What was the name of the man wrongfully convicted and executed for the 1913 murder of Mary Fagan, a case that led to the revival of the Ku Klux Klan and the founding of the Anti-Defamation League? A, was it Tom Horn? B, was it Bruno Hampton? C, Leo Frank? Or D, Albert Fish?
C, Albert Frank.
Leo Frank.
Oh, yes. Leo Frank.
You put two names together.
I was a little too eager on that one because
I know it.
I knew it. I knew that one. And then I butchered it. So
good job.
No pun intended.
Hey y'all, so before we get into this week's story, make sure that you hit that follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening so you don't miss any of our episodes. Last week, we had to go to the prison to meet with inmates, and that was very interesting. So I have to tell you about two inmates. One inmate was about to get out after he has been in prison for almost 40 years.
Wow.
He was in for murder. He said that he and his friend were drunk and that they were arguing over a girl. And they were both, just stupid, drunk, young. And the friend had stabbed him. And I don't know how bad. I don't know if it was just like a little superficial stab, but I know that he stabbed and killed his friend.
Wow.
He said that if he had been charged with that now, he would not have spent as much time because he kind of explained the law to me. But he said at that time, second-degree murder, which is what he was charged for, he got a life sentence. But he is fixing to get out now after all of those years in prison. He said he's really nervous. He's involved with the church. I think they go into the prison. And so he's real involved with them. And his parents are dead. His sister is dead. So he has no family. But I met another guy. Honestly, he scared me. He was older, but just very intimidating. And he started telling me his story like right away that, nothing wasn't his fault that he was there. He said that him and his daughter picked up these two strangers and gave them a ride somewhere and dropped them off, and they killed somebody. And then him and his daughter were convicted of, I believe he said, an accessory to murder. And now he was saying he's suing them and this and that. He's been in prison for 9 years for this murder. And then I also found out that he was a sex offender. So I just think there's something not quite. But most of them were so thankful that we were there. So it was not just us, but it was other organizations within the community. And the main cause for reoffending is that they don't have anywhere to go when they get out.
Okay.
And so a lot of the times they end up on the streets, which leads to drugs, which leads to all of these different things. So I know there were several guys there. They're about to get out and they're scared. They don't have any place to go.
They don't go to a halfway house?
A lot of them are full.
Okay. Wow, that sounds like a ministry opportunity.
It definitely does.
I do know that a lot of churches go in and do ministries in the prisons, and they are very well received.
Oh, yeah.
But we know you have to be careful on that end, too.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
absolutely.
we know of cases where that's been taken advantage of, so.
But it was just really interesting. But I'm really glad I got to go.
Yeah.
And I hope I get to go back.
Yeah, I hope so, too. Interesting. Was it the prison here in Ashboro?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Juanita, the person who gave me this story for this week, her husband was a guard there many years ago.
Yeah.
Her husband worked there with my brother-in-law, and then we met through them. And so
really
from that prison as a guard.
That is so cool. And so she's the one that gave you this episode?
Yep, this is episode for today.
Well, that's going to flow perfectly then into the story.
It does. She sent me this one about a murder that happened in the town where she was born. So life in Searcy, Arkansas back then was simple, from neighborly gatherings to classic comfort foods that brought people together. And one such dish was Arkansas's own chocolate gravy. That was actually a beloved breakfast treat that symbolized the warmth of home and family. And it is a recipe worth sharing, they tell me. So we are going to include that in our Facebook group. I was talking to Juanita about it. She told me that this year in May, in downtown Searcy, Arkansas, they're having a World Championship chocolate gravy cook-off.
That is awesome.
Yeah, how cool is that?
I love that.
So also along those lines, so since that was her hometown, the local hospital in Searcy was once owned by Dr. Porter Rodgers, and it was named for him at the time. He put his name on that hospital.
Okay.
And if asked, many of the locals will tell you they were born at that hospital, with quite a few of them having been delivered by Dr. Rodgers personally. And Juanita told me she was born there. She was not delivered by Dr. Rodgers, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it. But she said her mom really liked him, spoke highly of Dr. Rodgers, and most of the residents in that town did.
Okay.
So let's cut to the chase.
All right.
I'm going to tell you what happened in Searcy, Arkansas in 1974. At approximately 8:30 a.m. on September 26, 1974, Betty Ross arrived at the home of her employers, Dr. Porter Rodgers Sr. and his wife, Fern Rodgers. She had been working as a housekeeper for the doctor and his wife for around a month. Betty had 2 keys for the door, one for the top lock and one for the bottom, and they had to be unlocked in that order or the door wouldn't open. On that particular morning, she noticed that someone had left the hallway light on, and so she turned it off as she entered into the kitchen. Now, she figured Mrs. Rodgers must be sleeping in because she had not heard any noises in the house yet. The doctor had been staying at a local hotel since before she had even come to work for Mrs. Rodgers, so she knew he wasn't home. But as Betty headed toward the front door to pick up the newspaper, she was suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. She saw Mrs. Rodgers' body on the floor, partially in the entryway and partway in the living room. She assumed Mrs. Rodgers had fallen down the stairs, so she quickly called for an ambulance. It was only after Betty hung up the phone that it dawned on her that Mrs. Rodgers could not have fallen down the stairs and landed where her body was. So she hurriedly went back over to check, and that's when she saw a puddle of blood around Mrs. Rodgers' head. She realized this was not an accident at all, so she was nervous as she waited for help to arrive.
I'm curious as to why he was staying at a hotel.
Yeah, I will tell you.
Okay.
We'll get there. Dr. Porter Rodgers was born in 1904. He grew up on his family's farm in Arkansas, and he attended Arkansas Medical School in Little Rock, where he received his medical license in 1929 at just 25 years old. Fern Cowan, just 2 years younger than Porter, grew up just east of Searcy in Kensett, where her family owned a hotel. Her family was more affluent, and she attended Galloway Women's College, where she earned a speech degree. When Fern and Porter met, the match seemed like a good fit, and they did end up marrying in 1932. After that, they moved to Searcy, where they would start their family, and he would start a medical practice there. Like most young couples in those early years, money was tight, but they made do. Dr. Rodgers was working long days in a local practice, and then in the evenings, he would go over to Wake Night Sanitarium and do rounds there.
Wow. I don't know how they work like they do and have families.
I know. Well, I don't think they're really home for their families that much, probably.
Yeah.
Now, just a year into the marriage, however, they hit a snafu, and the marriage vow, for better or for worse, was going to be tested.
Okay.
Dr. Rodgers had used a phony $20 bill at a tire store in Little Rock, and then was found with a few more counterfeit bills on him. So he was indicted for possession of counterfeit bills.
Oh, gosh.
To which he pled guilty, and he received a 3-year prison term.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Because of this, he lost his medical license. So he was allowed like 4 months to get his affairs in order before he would have to start his sentence.
Okay.
And during that time, Fern stepped up on his behalf, and she really gathered support from their friends and family. She even had a petition in support of him.
Okay.
And it was in Fern's best interest to forgive her husband for the hardship that he had caused and just try to start over. And as it happened, probably due to her work and her family's influence, he was able to get his sentence suspended and replaced with a 5-year probation.
Okay.
And once his sentence was suspended, the state medical board could not really continue to hold the medical license. And after just 2 years of probation, his case was dismissed.
Okay.
And just like that, the scandal was behind him. Once Dr. Rodgers was back in practice, he purchased some land for a new office without consulting Fern first, I might add. And at first, Fern was not really thrilled with that idea. However, it turned out to be a good business deal for them. They were able to live in the back of the building for 1.5 years while the doctor built his practice up. And then pretty soon, they were able to purchase a bigger home from a local judge. Unfortunately, at some point, that house caught fire and burned up, and they lost a lot. So they found themselves having to start over once again, but this time they were more financially stable, and they purchased a nicer home. It was a colonial revival on Race Street. And eventually, as the couple did move up in society, that house became well known around town as the Rodgers house.
Okay.
And by now, they had their first child. It was a little boy named after his father, Porter Rodgers, Jr. So Porter and Fern were moving on up. Things were going well for Dr. Rodgers. So well, in fact, that he also bought the Wake Night Sanitarium where he had previously worked. That was actually a small local hospital, and he changed the name of that to Porter Rodgers Hospital.
Okay.
And that was the one we told you about at the beginning. He began investing in his business, building it up using aggressive growth strategies. He hired more nurses, he updated the equipment, and that in turn led to a larger patient base. It had grown to an 86-bed hospital, and things were booming for them now. They were doing pretty well financially. They had their nice home, their son, a hospital, and then in 1944, their daughter Anne was born. So now they have the American dream family, 1 son, 1 daughter, and social standing.
Yes.
So one thing about Porter, though, is he actually was not that great of a money manager.
Yeah, I kind of gathered that.
So if he was going to succeed, it was apparent he needed some help, and he needed to bring somebody on that could help rein in his spending a little bit so that his business could continue to thrive. And that person was Helen Cowan, his wife's sister-in-law. So Fern's brother's wife.
Okay.
And she was just the right person. Under her business management, it wasn't long before things were really tracking along pretty good at that point.
Okay.
By 1950, the generated income allowed Dr. Rodgers to begin investing in a rather expensive hobby, horse breeding. He hired a good trainer and actually produced several champion horses, including world champion Rodgers Perfection, which had been born on his birthday, but in 1955. As Dr. Rodgers' success grew, so did his eccentric behavior. Townsfolk began to whisper, Word was out around town that he had an eye for the ladies. It was also rumored by some that he had a tendency to perform unnecessary surgeries, such as appendectomies or gallbladder removals.
Okay.
Some people would even warn the town newcomers, like, you need to watch out for his little eagerness to do procedures that you may not need.
Procedures like that were a lot more risky back in those days.
Definitely. I mean, and some, like the gallbladder removals,
Yeah.
even today, those can be iffy.
They can.
So, yeah. Now, for everybody who was a little wary about him, there was always an opposite supporter of the doctor.
Sure.
In fact, my friend Juanita, she said her mother liked him and she thought he was a great doctor. And she wasn't alone. He was actually known for his charity. Like, if you came to him and you couldn't afford something you needed done, he would still do the procedure, whether you could pay or not.
Okay.
And you don't always see that a lot these days, especially. So I can see why lots of people thought highly of him.
Especially if he was making them think they needed it.
True.
But like, we say people are not one-dimensional. So I'm sure there was a good side to him.
Exactly. I'm sure the people who thought highly of him, there was something there for them to think that.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
I'm sure the ones who were a little bit like not so in his corner may have had a good reason for feeling that way as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of doctors and that kind of thing, back in the late 90s here in Asheboro, we had an OBGYN that got caught up in a scandal.
Oh.
Have you heard of this? Because you didn't live here then.
What year was it?
1999.
No, I did not live here.
Okay. He was actually my sister's doctor that delivered one of her sons. So his name was Dr. Juberg.
Okay.
He had a relationship with a patient. She got pregnant.
Oh, Lord.
He gave
Was he married?
I don't know. I don't remember hearing if he was like married or not.
Okay.
I want to say he was, but since I'm not sure, I don't want to slander him any more than I'm getting ready to tell you.
But that's the truth. So it's okay.
Yeah, this is the truth. So I know that. So he gave her some kind of pills for this to terminate the pregnancy.
Oh, God.
And she had complications from it. And so I remember at the time the papers printing that then he performed a medical procedure on her in their shared apartment.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So he lost his license, but it wasn't for good. It was just a few months. But then he resigned from his practice and he lost his rights at the hospital, or he resigned from whatever that was, and went somewhere in the same state and practiced again.
That's where I was going to say he probably went somewhere else and picked right up where he left off.
He did, but I think I heard years later that he lost his license again, maybe in South Carolina. I'm not sure where. I don't know where he's at today.
Well, character issues follow people.
They do. He said he was being treated unfairly. This was like a quote in the paper. I want to say it was because he had a relationship with a patient, but he said he must not have been married, because he said, but she's my fiance and this is different. And
well, yeah, but you still can't go doing medical.
You can't be performing abortions at your house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I wonder how they found out about it.
I've always wondered and I've never heard how. I don't know. But that was a pretty big scandal here back in the day. Like everybody, a lot of babies around here were delivered by him.
Wow. Yeah, that's a crazy story.
So when I researched this one, I kept thinking, oh yeah. And so I called my sister. I'm like, what was his name again? Because I know that he was her doctor.
Yeah, and it sounds like they have a lot in common, because when you're talking about this doctor's money issues, and he's got an eye for the lady. I mean, you can just tell there are some character issues.
Yes, exactly. So back to Dr. Rodgers. Once his children had grown up and they've moved out, like many couples, Fern and Porter found they had, drifted apart. They were empty nesters, and they both were kind of doing their own thing, usually separate from one another. Mm-hmm. The doctor was taking these trips to Vegas to gamble, and Fern was doing her society stuff. And so they found themselves facing financial problems once again, due to some unwise decisions on Porter's part.
Okay.
They had suffered some business losses on some of their assets. And Porter now owed significant amounts of money to various banks. So he wanted to take out more loans to cover some of that, some loans on property he owned, like a second mortgage. And Fern was solidly against it. You know, he was robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right.
But Fern, she's trying to stop the bleeding, per se.
Yeah.
And so she refused to sign any more notes for him to borrow money. She just put her
Smart
foot down.
woman.
Yeah, she put her foot down, like, I'm not doing that. And so that did cause tension in the marriage. But even more so was the discovery that Porter was having an affair with a woman at the hospital.
Okay, I was expecting him to be having one with her sister-in-law.
I can see why you would think that. Wasn't her.
Okay.
I know she was helping him with the finances.
Yes.
But she was really trying to help Fern because I don't think she was too fond of the doctor and his ways either.
Okay, well, I misjudged her then.
Yeah. So at one point, they were actually so covered up in debt that their son, Doctor, who was also a doctor now, Dr. Porter Rodgers Jr., he had to come back to town to Searcy to have a meeting with his dad and his dad's attorney about his financial mismanagement.
So he had some serious issues. Well, you know what? That just goes to show what you always say. You know, it's not about the amount of money that you make.
Right.
It's what you do with what you have.
That's so true. Yep. And that meeting ended with Senior promising to use better judgment in his financial decisions, but then Porter Jr. and his sister Ann borrowed $50,000 from the bank to get their father out of the hole.
My gosh.
And I don't think at that time they even realized that he wasn't just bad with money, but he had a growing gambling problem. Many times he would travel to Las Vegas for just like one day. He would go hit up the casinos and then, of course, come back in more debt than before.
That is just so stupid to me. Just pure stupid. I hate to say that, but it is.
I think people truly get addicted to it, though.
I guess.
It was rumored that Dr. Rodgers had used hospital funds for his own personal use, and some had heard tell of him being involved in an insurance fraud scheme. Now, I wondered if the accusations of him performing surgeries and stuff that didn't need to happen, maybe those were not real. Maybe that was some kind of insurance fraud. Maybe he was billing for some.
Right.
I don't know.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. I have some information about that at the end that kind of goes along with that, and we'll talk about it a little more. And as if that wasn't enough, he had yet another affair. So in 1967, he had a heart attack. And the couple, their marriage was struggling like never before, but things would get worse. In 1969, they actually sold their hospital to a larger company out of Little Rock, and he was still able to maintain his private practice there, but he wasn't the owner, and he netted $50,000 from that, a profit. Do you think he paid back that debt that his children had taken out?
Oh my gosh.
To get him out of the hole?
Those poor kids.
I don't think he did. It would have been a great time to get out of debt, but records show that his gambling problem was increasing and was pretty much out of control at this point. He was actually getting debt collection letters from Vegas casinos addressed to him at the hospital.
Oh my gosh.
Caesar's Palace sent him a bill dated January 29th, 1970, and it said, "Dear Dr. Rodgers, it is embarrassing for me to have to contact you in reference to your returned checks. I am equally embarrassed for you that you allowed this to happen. Enclosed envelope is for your convenience. Kindly remit $2,400 to clear your account. Chuck Bargle, Credit Department."
And back then, that would have been a good amount of money.
Yeah, and actually that wasn't that was just a fraction of what he owed. At one point, he was in debt to Caesar's Palace for over $13,000.
In the 60s.
Yeah. But perhaps his lowest point was when his check for his medical society dues bounced, and he could no longer hide his indiscretions from his colleagues. Now, Fern, she's a distinguished doctor's wife.
Yes.
She had risen up in society through the years. At age 68, she was the picture of elegance and grace. She was a staple in the community. Imagine Emily Gilmore from the Gilmore Girls.
Okay, yes.
And you get the idea. She served at civic events. She threw parties and showers. She played bridge at the club. And she was actually one of the more competitive members of the American Contract Bridge League. But by 1974, With the financial strain mounting, Porter and Fern were living separate lives, and she was in the house and he was staying at the local motel just a mile away.
Okay.
They only communicated on an as-needed basis. He's still paying for the house, and they're not divorced or anything like that. He's just staying down there. So that's why you had asked earlier. September 25th, the day before the murder, started like any other day for Fern. Her sister-in-law, Helen, had gotten up and left for home already. Many times Helen would stay the night at the house.
Helen is
her sister-in-law, the one who helped the doctor at his hospital all those years before. When Fern got up that morning, she did some shopping. She went and visited her son. After lunch, she headed over to the Chevrolet dealer to look at a used Cadillac, but she didn't want a used car, so she decided against that one. She was going to hold out and try to get a better deal on a new one. That evening at 6 p.m., she picked up her friend, Mary Ann Davidson, her bridge partner. They swung by Kentucky Fried Chicken for supper on their way to the Elks Club. Later that night, after the card games wound down and they all prepared to leave, one of the ladies took a spill on the way out the door, and she kind of hurt her wrist pretty badly. So several of the women that were like, oh, we'll take you to the hospital. And they saw to it that she got there. And Fern's son, Dr. Rodgers Jr., treated her. And he told the ladies, you can go on home. She's fine for the night. Fern gave her friend Alma a ride home from the hospital, and then she drove herself home. And that was the last time anybody would see her alive. She had no idea that someone was waiting inside for her to arrive. That next morning, when housekeeper Betty Ross had discovered Fern Rodgers on the floor of her home, she had phoned for help, assuming that Mrs. Rodgers was already deceased. Curtis Briggs and Charles Fowkes responded in the ambulance within minutes. They pulled around to the back of the house, just as the housekeeper had instructed them to do on the phone. And when they get out, she informs them that someone has hit Mrs. Rodgers on the back of the head, and she reminds them, don't move her because police are on the way. They entered the home to find Mrs. Rodgers lying on her left side. There is a set of keys by her elbow. Charles, the older and more experienced of the two emergency responders, notices right away that she has 2 bullet wounds just above her temple. This was no hit on the head, as Betty had first thought. Mrs. Rodgers has been shot, and it is obvious she is already dead. There is not a pulse, and her body is completely cold. On the floor, about 2 feet away from her head, they observe a spent bullet casing, and there is another one on the floor in the entryway. At this point, Charles calls and requests the coroner to come. Betty Ross phones Fern's son, the doctor, and leaves a message for him. When he returns her call, she has to inform him that his mother has passed. Ray Johnson, the assistant coroner, reaches the house. Once inside, without thinking about it, he does bend down and pick up one of the shell casings by Fern's head.
Okay.
He notices that it's a .25 caliber, and then he puts it back down in the spot that he picked it up from.
Okay.
Shortly after that, the head coroner, Alan Foster, known as Mutt to everyone in town, he arrives and he takes charge. He starts writing down notes of his findings. He records in his notebook that Fern was shot twice in the head and the location of those 2 bullet casings. He notes 1 earring on the floor about 3 feet away from the body. He immediately secures the scene, instructing the ambulance drivers, don't let anybody in this house, and they wait for the police. Police Chief Dean Hunter happens to be patrolling the neighborhood, so he arrives pretty fast. Betty Ross fills him and Mutt Allen in on everything that has happened that morning. Someone calls the hospital so they can talk to Dr. Rodgers and let him know about his wife's death. But he's not at the hospital, but they do know where to find him, having breakfast at Bill's Grill, as he usually does every morning. The hospital phones over to the grill. When Dr. Rodgers is told something's happened at the house, he calmly goes back to his table, drops a $5 bill on it, and goes on over to check out what's happened. He gets to the house where his son meets him and breaks the news that Fern is gone. Dr. Rodgers then instructs the officers to put their best detectives on this case. He does make an odd remark. He says, how can anybody do such a thing after leaving church? That is weird.
Yeah.
They figure he just assumes the murderer had attended a Wednesday night service because this is a Thursday morning. And they decide, well, he may just be in shock.
Okay.
But it doesn't make very much sense.
Mm-mm.
After that, he goes to the back door and tries to enter the house, but an officer blocks his way. Somebody nearby hears the doctor say, well, how did she die? Natural causes or what? Alton French, one of the groundskeepers, had arrived, and while he was working around the property, he sees Mrs. Rodgers' purse in the backyard, and some of the contents are strewn about on the ground. So he alerts the police, and they come over, and they find a red coin purse, a wallet, and, other handbag contents, lipstick, whatever. Inside the coin purse is a horseshoe-shaped diamond brooch and a Bulova diamond watch.
So they weren't trying to rob her.
Exactly, because who wouldn't have taken that?
Right.
Later, it's actually determined that those two things alone are worth over $30,000.
Okay.
So they missed a good opportunity if that's what they were after.
Right.
They do gather those items for evidence, and they're thinking just like you, like that's really not a burglar. What kind of burglar would throw that down in the yard? But they don't know. Why else would anybody want Mrs. Rodgers dead? Like, could Dr. Rodgers have owed somebody and not been able to pay them? Maybe, he probably had that gambling problem. They're thinking, does he have some sinister connections? Maybe somebody's trying to send a message. They don't know yet. They do question neighbors, and no one saw or heard anything. But there was another possible motive that everybody was aware of. A woman by the name of Peggy Hale, who the doctor had openly been having an affair with for some time.
Okay.
Peggy Jean Hale had been working as a waitress at Bill's Grill when she first met Dr. Rodgers. He ate breakfast regularly at Bill's and quickly noticed Peggy's good looks.
How old is he at this point? Like 7 in his
He's 70 now.
Okay.
Yeah. When he first meets Peggy, he's probably 67, 68.
Okay.
Okay. The two easily bantered back and forth, and some would say they flirted. And when Peggy had asked Dr. Rodgers for some diet pills, he agreed to prescribe her some. At 19, Peggy was a beautiful girl, the daughter of a preacher, brought up in a strict religious home, one that she didn't necessarily share the same moral values with. She was a bit of a wild child, but she was a smart girl. She was in her high school beta club. When she was a senior in high school, though, she had gotten involved with a teacher, a married teacher.
Was she like the older men?
Yeah, and she had pursued that teacher.
Okay.
So it's not like he was grooming her.
Right.
I mean, he may have been, I don't know, but we do know that she was doing some pursuing. So when she began flirting with the doctor at the grill, it wasn't her first foray into older men, like you say.
Right.
And it resulted in him leaving her some pretty big tips, like $100 tips sometimes.
Okay.
So once he told her, yes, I'll prescribe you the diet pills, he says, swing by the office and pick them up. And then that meeting, when she went to do that, was the catalyst for that affair that began between the 19-year-old college student and the 68-year-old married doctor.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
19?
Yep, and 68.
Oh, okay.
She said that he kissed her that day in his office. The next month, when she came for her diet pills again, they kissed again. He started asking her out. He said, I want to take you to dinner. And she said, well, I don't know. I'll have to think about it. And finally, after a few months of it carrying on like that, he made advances toward her during one of those office visits, and they went into the examining room and had sex.
Okay.
And she said that was the first time they were together. Her trips to his office became more frequent, and he was giving her money a lot. He fell in love with her first, and he told her how he felt. And then over time, she said she fell in love with him too. And it was not long before he gave her a job as a secretary at his office, although she had no formal training. He was paying her $550 a month. And later it came out he was also giving her like an extra $100 a week. And he was making the payments on her car and her trailer.
Sure.
And gifts and all those trips they started taking together to Vegas and stuff. So he's footing the bill for a lot of extra.
Right. I'm not surprised he's broke.
Right. It should also be noted that after he hired Peggy, all 3 of his nurses quit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that must not have gone over too well.
Sure.
Well, it also didn't go over too well with her parents. Her father, Milton Hale, was a pastor. So he sat down with them and confronted them and told them, hey, you know of the sinfulness of this situation. And he's like, you need to put a stop to this.
Right.
But they weren't asking for Milton's permission. And they didn't really care too much if they got his blessing. They just were adamant. They were not going to break up. You know that saying, the heart wants what the heart wants?
Yeah.
Of course, there is also that saying from Scripture that the heart is desperately wicked.
Yes.
Yeah. Her parents, because they didn't want to lose the relationship with her, they, even though they didn't like it, they kind of went along with it. And at times he did buy gifts for her younger brothers and paid for stuff for her family too. So
I cannot imagine my daughter coming home with a 67-year-old man.
I know that would be.
I can't imagine my 28-year-old coming home with a 68-year-old man.
Ugh. Sorry. Well, when Peggy came down with hepatitis, she decided that she needed to move back home from her trailer where she had been living. Her father had co-signed for her to have a trailer. And like I said, the doctor had made some of those payments. But she did continue working for and dating the doctor. And even though she was back in her parents' home, they allowed the relationship.
Wow.
I don't think I would. I'd be like, if you're living here, you're not seeing this married man.
Exactly.
That's old enough to be your grandfather.
By my rules.
Right. So the affair between Peggy and Dr. Rodgers, the whole town knew. Nobody's shocked by that. The hospital staff, very aware. Many of them had witnessed a confrontation in the cafeteria once between Fern and Peggy.
Oh, no.
Fern had shown up while the couple was having lunch, and she had words with Peggy, calling her father, the preacher, a hypocrite. And she told Peggy to leave so she could speak with Porter. And Peggy refused to leave. She's like, no, I'm eating my lunch.
Oh, gosh.
Rumor had it that Peggy had slapped Fern during that argument. But Peggy said that was not true. She said, no, nobody slapped anybody. We just had some words.
Okay.
So the rumor mill.
Right.
But with all this talk, the police, they asked Dr. Rodgers, can we search your office? And he consents, and they find a .25 caliber pistol inside of a desk drawer in his office at the hospital. They also find an empty magazine and an ammo box with 43 cartridges. Fern had been shot with that exact caliber handgun.
Okay.
Later, though, ballistics will prove that that was not the gun used to shoot Mrs. Rodgers.
Okay.
Now, by this time, Peggy's 21. They met when she was 19.
Okay.
But now she's 21. And police do bring her in for questioning, and she is informed that due to that affair, that is a pretty big motive for murder, and she has been a suspect in the murder from day one. They had also heard rumor that she had a .25 caliber pistol that she carried in her car. So they ask her about that, but she denies that she has a pistol. She says, I've never carried a gun. And that was in direct contradiction to what police had been told by more than one other person.
Okay.
They had done their homework on that, and they let her know real quick that they knew her father had bought her a gun when she lived alone in the trailer.
So she was lying.
She was lying. So at this point, she has no choice but to admit, okay, that's true. So she explains her father had been worried about her for her safety, so he had bought it, and she tells them that they had even practiced shooting it in her parents' backyard some. But she also says that she no longer has that gun. She said it had jammed once, and so she had given it to an ex-boyfriend named Jerry, who was supposed to get it fixed for her. And she said she had never gotten it back from him because he had died.
Now, was any of this corroborated?
No. Nobody ever found Jerry. They asked her about this rumor they had heard that she had once fired it inside of her trailer. And again, she admits, well, I did shoot a hole in the kitchen floor one night when I was drunk by accident, and I thought the safety was on. And it turns out Porter was actually at her home when that happened, but he had been in the sleep in the other room. They do question her about their relationship, and she tells them that she and Dr. Rodgers did intend to marry, but they hadn't told anyone yet. she said she wanted to keep it quiet. And the investigator said, "Oh, you can't keep things quiet. It might keep quiet in Little Rock for about a week, but it won't keep quiet in Searcy for a minute." We know places like that.
Yes.
Investigators tried to get Dr. Rodgers and Peggy both to take polygraphs, and they both refuse. Rodgers' attorney has advised against it.
Okay.
On September 28th, Fern Rodgers is laid to rest, even as the Arkansas State Police continue searching for her killer. They're questioning people, and a night supervisor at the hospital tells the police that on the night of the murder, Dr. Rodgers had called several times, checking on patients, leaving phone numbers where he can be reached. And that wasn't typical of him to do, to call that many times.
Right. I want to know what his kids are thinking. Are you going to get to that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Investigators want to see if Peggy's gun is a match for the one used in the murders. They get a search warrant for her trailer at Shirley's Mobile Home Park in McRae, Arkansas. That investigation, they actually went under the trailer where she supposedly fired the gun into the floor and searched under it and found the bullet from that shot.
Whoa, okay.
And they collect that. That's good police work.
That is.
So they send that off for testing. So the 2 bullets had been removed from Fern's head during her autopsy. And the science there is the shell, like shells from a gun. Mm-hmm. It's like almost having a fingerprint. They have these lines in them.
Okay.
And you can tell which gun fired a bullet. I'm no police officer.
Okay.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
There are these patterns of lines, and they can tell.
Okay.
And so they knew if the lines in that casing matched the ones they found under the bullet from the trailer, and
they had a match.
That they have a match. And
she's already admitted to being the one to fire it, and that it came from her gun.
Yes.
Okay.
And that would be enough to arrest Peggy. During this time, investigators also speak to her father, Milton, and he tells them about his disapproval of their relationship, and he's honest with them. And he tells them that when he heard the doctor's wife had been murdered, they suspected Peggy might be involved.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's pretty,
Yeah.
He says he had even asked Peggy then about the gun he had bought her, and she told him the same story she had given the officers about giving it to that ex-boyfriend, Jerry. So officers ask him, "Can we search your property for the shell casings from where y'all practiced?" And so he agrees to that. And they go to his house, and what do you know? They recover several .25 caliber shells from his backyard that had been laying there all that time. And they send that to the ballistics lab as well. And that ballistics testing comes back with a match.
Oh my gosh.
The shell casings from Peggy's trailer and the ones found on the floor of Fern Rodgers' home where she had been shot had to come from the same gun. Dr. Rodgers decides he's going to get up there and talk to them. So he asks to meet with investigators, and he goes in and he tells them that he and Peggy are being framed. And he thinks that his horse trainer, Joe Webb, might be the killer.
Poot.
Yeah.
Why would...
And that's the thing. I don't even know if he even gave them a reason for that claim, but then nothing came from that. There was no evidence.
Of course not. Just something to divert.
Yeah. Then officers, they ask the doctor's son and his wife, his daughter and her husband, Milton Hale, Peggy's father, and Peggy.
Okay.
They ask them all if they'll come in for polygraphs.
Oh.
They all do. This time, I guess Peggy's father must have talked her into doing it. And so they all went and took one. And out of those 6 people, Peggy's the only one who does not pass.
Wow. So even the doctor passes.
He didn't take one.
Oh.
He never did go back and take one.
Okay.
Mm-mm. So on November 8th, about 6 weeks after the murder, Peggy Hale is arrested and charged with capital felony murder, which is punishable by death.
Yeah.
Dr. Rodgers writes a check for $6,000 and gives it to her father, and Milton uses that to hire Jack Holt Jr., one of the best defense attorneys in Arkansas, to defend his daughter. But police, they don't think Peggy acted alone.
Of course not.
They're thinking, yeah, Dr. Rodgers, you had a hand in this.
Mm-hmm.
So they start putting pressure on him, and they tell him, Peggy's going to go down for this. And if she's innocent, or if she, had just a small part in it, you better start talking. He just continues to deny that. And he says, I didn't do this and Peggy didn't do it either. And they grill him pretty hard during that time. When they question him about where he was on the night of the murder and what was going on, his version of what he was doing then varies just a little bit from Peggy's.
Okay.
She had told him pretty much this story, but here's what he says. And his story, though, includes a lot of very detailed information, which is strange.
When they do that, they're lying.
When you start giving stuff details that really don't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. He does admit that Fern had called him about 5 days before the murder and told him she was going to get a divorce and she was going to clean him out. But he insisted that was not cause for him to murder her.
Okay.
They say, well, she had prior to this had refused to give you a divorce because she didn't want to dissipate the estate and she didn't want you to have the freedom to marry your husband.
Right. Exactly.
And he admits, yes, she had refused before now. And then they say, we know you have failed to pay taxes. We know you've been making payments to the state of Arkansas on that tax debt. The medical board has revoked your license to prescribe narcotics this year, and your medical practice is in decline. And they're like, all the while, you and Peggy are still living large. You're taking those trips. You're doing these little getaway vacations. And that's all a pretty strong motive for murder.
Yes.
Dr. Rodgers, he's not giving anything up, and there's nothing to directly attach him to the murders.
I'm surprised she hasn't given him up yet.
I know, because she's sitting there already arrested. She's in a cell.
Yeah.
Well, her father goes to the jail and has a talk with her. And that's when Peggy agrees to give the investigators the information they've been asking for.
Okay.
So it took her dad to get it out of her before she would turn. She does confess to having a part in the murder, but she tells them she was not the one who actually did it, and Dr. Rodgers didn't do it.
Okay.
There was a co-conspirator, and his name was Barry Kimbrell. When I say Barry, his name is not like B-A-R-R-Y. It's literally spelled like a berry. B-E-R-R-Y.
Okay.
I don't know why I felt like I needed to just throw that in there. Barry Kimbrell, age 32, was the owner of Kimbrell Company Real Estate. Peggy had known him for years. They had actually dated in high school, and they had stayed friends all those years later.
Mm-hmm.
The mobile home that she had lived in actually had been bought from him.
Okay.
Peggy had introduced Barry and the doctor, and then Dr. Rodgers started treating Barry as a patient. Sometimes he did hang out with the couple, either dining out or at the racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
And one night, while they were all together, the doctor complained about his wife and her not being willing to give him a divorce. And Barry says, well, why don't you just have her killed? He said, I know somebody who would do it for no more than $6,000.
Gosh.
This piqued Dr. Rodgers' interest, and a plan between the three of them began to form. After that, Peggy claimed that they met on many occasions to discuss the details of the plot. She said Dr. Rodgers had given Barry $3,000 up front to pay this guy he knew, and another $3,000 was to come after it was done. But later, Barry came back and said, my guy backed out. He was watching the house and cops were around and he got spooked. He said, I'm not doing it. He said, so I'll just do it myself.
Okay.
So Dr. Rodgers gave him another few $100s here and there on a couple of occasions. He was kind of taking care of Barry, in some ways. According to Peggy, Porter felt the best night to do it would be a Wednesday night because that's when Fern played bridge, and then she came home alone to an empty house. She said that the doctor gave Barry the keys to those 2 locks on the back door and told him how to open it. Remember, it's got to be opened in a certain order. Peggy told him she didn't want him to use her gun because it was registered in her father's name. And Barry assured her it can't be traced back to him. I'm going to take care of that. Barry also still had a master key to Peggy's trailer. Since he had sold it to her, he just hadn't given her the master key, and I guess she didn't feel like she needed to have it. She didn't mind him having it, I guess. So he used that key and went to her trailer and retrieved her gun and filed off the serial number. Now, before the murder was successful, it had taken a few attempts. This is Peggy's version. She said at first, Barry had tried to do the murder about 2 weeks before it actually happened. But that night, for some reason, Fern hadn't come home.
Okay.
So the next week on Wednesday, he tried again. But this time she had come home too early and he didn't have time to be in the house waiting. So on the third attempt, the night that she was actually ambushed and killed, Peggy had driven Barry to the house that night, and he left his car about 3 blocks away. Then she drove back to the motel where Porter was at, and the two of them drove over to her parents' house, I guess kind of establishing an alibi.
Okay.
And then later that night, Porter left to go home. And once he got back to the hotel, either he called her or she called him to make sure he was there.
Okay.
The next morning, Barry called her and said, the deed is done.
Oh, my gosh.
So then he explained he didn't have time to take the jewelry because he got in a rush because a car had turned into the driveway while he was still in the house, but after he had murdered her.
Oh.
So he panicked and got out of there as fast as he could, leaving behind that valuable jewelry. And all he got was a handful of traveler's checks that were in Fern's name. And he told Peggy he had thrown the gun in the river somewhere between Searcy and Beebe, but he didn't say exactly where. So police go find Barry Kimbrell, and they track him down and they question him. And it doesn't take him long to confess. And at that point, his story pretty much matches Peggy's, except for a few minor details. He does tell them that he threw the weapon in Bull Creek.
Okay.
They searched Bull Creek with divers, but the murder weapon was never found.
Oh, my gosh.
After Peggy and Barry Kimbrell both confess, police go back to Dr. Rodgers and they say, well, there have been some developments and we need to discuss them. So you need to come on in and talk. Dr. Rodgers goes downtown to meet with them. At that time, he waives his right to an attorney, and they inform him they know all about Kimbrell and that Kimbrell and Peggy have both implicated him. Dr. Rodgers is shocked. He does not believe that Peggy has confessed. And he tells them, I have a hard time believing that. And they can lie to you.
Yeah, sure.
And so they play a taped recorded confession for him. So
okay.
Here it is. So then he's like, well, can I speak to Peggy? And they say, okay, sure.
Yeah.
So they go get her out of jail and bring her down. And they bring her in the room. And she says, yeah, I did confess. And then Dr. Rodgers says, I want to speak with an attorney before I say anything else. And of course,
my gosh,
that brings the interview to a full stop.
Yeah.
On November 9th, Dr. Rodgers, in his third interview that they had had with him in just 24 hours, now he gives his version of events. He starts placing the blame on Peggy. He claims that the previous spring, Peggy was the one who had made the suggestion of getting rid of Mrs. Rodgers so they could get married. He declined and said that's just not the right thing to do.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
And he says she brought it up again, and she suggested Barry Kimbrell because he knew somebody from Chicago who would do it for $3,000. And I told you that guy whose name was supposedly Frank, he came and staked out Mrs. Rodgers, but the cops had scared him off. And then Barry agreed to do it himself. And the doctor says he didn't believe Frank even existed. He just thinks Barry made that up to get more money and had pocketed what he had given him the first time. The doctor said he gave Kimbrell an extra $600, a set of keys to the back door, and instructions about how to do the locks. His story pretty much lines up with Peggy's after that about the actual deed being done and what happened afterwards.
Okay.
He said he then gave $200 more to Kimbrell. And at that time, Kimbrell told him about the traveler's checks that he had gotten. He was just able to grab those out of the purse really quick. And he's like, what do you want me to do with these? And for whatever reason, they decided to just mail those to the sheriff anonymously.
Okay.
I don't know what the point of that was.
Right.
Dr. Rodgers, when asked, why he did this, his only explanation for being a part of it was that he was hungry for Peggy Hale and they wanted to get married. And Fern had been refusing a divorce. And he said the only other thing he could say was that he was sorry, but they had just gotten caught up in it and it happened. He said Barry's only interest was the money. And then he finished with this justification. He said he had never mistreated Fern in any way.
Okay.
I guess adultery is not mistreatment,
Yeah,
but okay,
I guess.
whatever. And he's always provided for her with a sufficient income, and she just stopped loving him over finances and sex.
Yeah, because he was having it with other people, I would imagine.
I would imagine so. So he's placed under arrest for capital felony murder as well. And he asks if it's okay for him to see Peggy again, and they say, well, if she's willing to see you. So they return with her, and he tells her, don't worry, Porter's here with you, honey. Porter's right here.
Huh? What an idiot.
Sunday, November 10th, Dr. Rodgers' 2 grown children that you had asked about, Porter Jr. and Ann, visit him in jail. They just want an explanation of why he did this to their mother.
Yeah.
And at first, he's saying stuff like, don't hurt me. And they're like, we're not here to hurt you.
Yeah.
He says he's tired and he's been through too much already.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what a narcissist.
Yeah, exactly. You labeled that one. Then his daughter, she just is, I just want to know why. She's asking for that explanation that she deserves.
Yes.
And he says, don't come here and start criticizing me. I'm brokenhearted and I've got enough trouble already without you coming here and criticizing me.
What?
Yeah, he didn't like to be criticized.
Okay.
That's the narcissist part of him, I guess.
Oh my gosh. They brutally killed their mother.
I know. But,
gosh.
I
feel so bad for those kids. Like, what do you do with that?
I don't know. I don't know. That would be a horrible thing to have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And they tell him, how deeply hurt they are. And his son says, we just don't understand why you let that trash lead you down the primrose path.
Mm.
And he just tells them he's sorry, that he loves them, and that he loved their mother.
Oh, he did not love their mother.
No.
He had her shot.
Exactly. And then they discuss some hospital business and some financial business. And he tells his son, make sure tomorrow you check on the rounds, you check on this person and let them out of the hospital. Like he's tying up those ends. And again, he apologizes for any trouble or embarrassment he's caused them. And they leave.
I hope they don't have a thing in the world to do with him after that.
I hope not either. And I don't know. I didn't find anything after that. That was the only thing I found. So I'm not sure. Dr. Rodgers hires 38-year-old Ed Bethune to defend him. Ed is a former FBI agent and a former prosecutor. The judge for the trial is Judge John Anderson, who's 59 years old and also a former prosecutor and a World War II vet. And that judge has a really good reputation. So at the request of his defense team, Dr. Rodgers undergoes a mental evaluation. He complains that his mind has been slipping in recent years. The psychologist, Doug Stevens, says that his actions are consistent with organic brain disease, which would result in a diminished mental capacity. And he recommends that Dr. Rodgers be placed in a psychiatric facility for further testing. I think his actions are consistent with narcissism, just like you said.
And with his degenerate behavior.
Yes. The judge does send him to Arkansas State Hospital for mental health evaluations, where he spends 2 months. In January 1975, whatever those results were, the prosecutor comes out and makes it sound like he insinuates that Dr. Rodgers' mental tests show that he is without psychosis.
Okay.
But his whole defense is kind of built on an insanity defense nonetheless. Now, the prosecutors want Peggy to testify against the doctor.
Yeah.
They insinuate she might get a consideration if she testifies against Porter and Kimbrell. As it stands right now, though, she faces 3 options. They could charge her. She has been charged with capital murder, and she can face the death penalty with that. Or they could drop it down to first-degree murder, where she would be facing life in prison. Or they could drop it to second-degree murder, and she would only get 21 years. So she knows that she could possibly get charges reduced to that second degree for that testimony.
Yeah.
So later, her lawyer, he advises her, he couldn't get a promise for a plea bargain. He's like, yeah, we can't promise you that. But if you choose to testify, he encourages her, you should, because it's the right thing.
Yeah.
But he says, if you do, it's got to be because you want to see true justice, but out of no guarantees from us that you're going to be spared. And he says, And if you do testify, you're going to be incriminating yourself later at your own trial.
Right.
With that testimony.
Right.
After consideration and discussion with her family, I guess, she agreed to be the star witness for the prosecution. I think her dad really influenced her a lot. He must have had a real strong influence in her life.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Because he's the one that got her to confess to begin with. He's the one that got her to take that polygraph.
Yeah.
And now she's going to
And I'm proud of him for doing that because it sounds like he knew she probably had something to do with it. And, and it sounds like he loved her, but at the same time, he wanted the truth to come out.
Yeah, and he didn't cover for her.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is rare these days.
Very. So in February of 1975, they start jury selection, and it's hard to find a jury that doesn't have ties to this main doctor in the town. I mean, half the people are like, he delivered me.
Yeah.
Several of the prospective jurors, they're dismissed because they'll ask, have you been treated by him? And they'll say, oh, yeah, and he helped me financially with my hospital bill, or he delivered my son and saved his life, things like that.
Yeah.
So it takes them quite a while. But after 8 days, they finally have a jury, and it's not stacked full of doctors and lawyers and businesses, but it's full of tradespeople, farmers, and homemakers. The case is so sensational and talked about around town that high school students are offered a 1-day excused absence if they want to attend the trial.
Oh my gosh.
And they'll get it included in their civics credit.
That's crazy.
I would have been there.
Yeah, definitely.
So the defense makes a motion to suppress Rodgers' confession. So now they're saying, well, this confession might not have been voluntary. It might have been coerced. The prosecution says no. He was advised of his Miranda rights. He signed a statement of rights form.
Yeah.
And he gave that voluntarily. And the judge agrees that the evidence does point in that direction, so they continue. So then the next ploy is the defense. They try to question his mental capacity during the confession. Rodgers told his lawyers, I was exhausted. I had not had much sleep the night before. I had been woken up with calls from the hospital, and I'd laid down for just a couple of hours. And then when I went in there, I was, basically running on no sleep. And he says that he did ask for a lawyer 3 or 4 times. He says investigator Jim Lester had threatened him with a pistol. And once when he asked for a lawyer, he said that investigator told him, I'm tired of hearing that.
I don't believe that.
I don't either. The doctor says he was having a weak spell, that he had these before, like these dizzy spells, and he just didn't remember much after that.
Oh my gosh. He's sleeping with a 19-year-old. I don't.
And they would keep like notes in a journal about their sex life that he was pretty proud of.
Yeah.
So he wasn't worried about his health declining then.
Right. I doubt he was worried about weak spells and all that.
Right. But ultimately that judge did rule to let his confession be admitted. During the trial, the prosecution describes the situation like this. They said that the 3 had met several times to plot the murder, and Kimbrell's motive was money. They said Peggy's motive was social position, financial security, and her feelings for the doctor. And they said the defendant, Dr. Rodgers' motive was his love for Peggy Hale and their marriage and desiring to give her the lifestyle she had gotten used to. But the defense argued their story was that the doctor had raised his family and his wife in an affluent lifestyle. He had provided always very well for his wife and kids. But in recent years, his behavior had gotten strange. His health was failing. He had had 2 heart attacks. He had a serious stomach disorder. And after the problems in his marriage with Fern, he started chasing a second childhood, like a midlife crisis, so to speak. And all that time, he didn't know it, but his brain was literally shrinking.
Oh, please.
He was a victim of organic brain disease. They said this disease has 3 stages, mild, moderate, and severe. And Dr. Rodgers' disease was already moderate, quickly heading to severe. And that had been why he had just kind of gone off the deep end.
I think that's just an aging thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get to kill your spouse when you get older just because you're brain changes.
Right?
I mean, ours changes at menopause. I don't get to kill my husband, although
Even-
sometimes.
Sometimes we might feel like it.
Right, like right now when he's in there being loud when I'm trying to podcast.
Well, they'll be able to hear it if we're able to edit it out, right? They described how he recently had been forgetful, that they said he had prescribed the wrong medication for some of his patients recently, and that he had been taken off of surgery duty because of it. They said he'd been falling asleep at work and had become hostile with some of his nurses. And then they shifted the blame to Peggy. They called her a gold digger who had already benefited to the tune of around $50,000 from the doctor. They also said that Peggy and Barry had worked together for years scamming old people out of money. They pointed out that some instances in Barry's past where he had befriended older women and scammed them out of money, and said that she was a part of it, and that these two were scamming the doctor. He said the doctor really needed to fear her because had they gotten away with this, the doctor would have been next.
I mean, that's a possibility.
Well, it is a possibility because there was a letter written to Peggy while they were all in jail, waiting trial, from Barry. And he is professing that she's always been the one he loved and that he always had seen them kind of getting back together eventually. And yet he's agreeing to kill the doctor's wife so they can marry.
Yes.
So, I mean, that sounds a little like, there may be something to that. The jury ends up seeing 14 photographs of the crime scene, including 3 of Mrs. Rodgers' body, showing that point-blank range that she'd been shot. I mean, they could see the burn marks on the skin on her temple, and that left an impression.
I'm sure it did.
The prosecution then brings Peggy to the stand, and she testifies, and this time she says that not only did he pay Barry the $3,000 up front, she said Dr. Rodgers told Barry whatever jewelry you find you can keep as also part of your payment. That he also told him he wanted him to rob, rape, and kill her. And she said Barry kind of paused and said he didn't think he could rape her. Now, she had not said that in the original police interview, and so I don't know how that went over in court, but that's what she said on the stand. Also, she said in another conversation that Barry had asked, well, what do I do if somebody comes in with her on the night that I'm there to kill her?
Probably kill them too.
Dr. Rodgers had said, well, it would only be Helen Cowan if that happens, and if so, you'll just have to kill her too. So they clearly painted Peggy as a gold digger, and she insists on the stand that she was not after his money, that she loved him. She says he was considerate and kind, and he treated her like a woman should be treated.
Okay.
I'm sure that money had nothing to do with that.
I'm sure.
This was kind of interesting, too, because, of course, they're going to attack her character on the stand.
Yeah.
And so they got her to admit in high school when she had been interested in that teacher. And somehow they got her to admit that she had originally slept with Barry Kimbrell in high school because she was a virgin. She wanted to have sex with this teacher, and she didn't know how. So she slept with Barry so he could show her what to do so she could go after the teacher.
Oh my gosh. There's something wrong with that girl.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah. They pointed out all those inconsistencies in her testimony, and then, they really did some damage to her character and testimony.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
Look what we're thinking of her right now.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the jury has to decide if she's a credible witness or not.
I think I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if she is, actually. I think they're all 3 just terrible people.
It sounds like it. Doctors for the defense, they testify that the brain shrinkage would have been the cause of his part in the criminal act and not the result of his own free will. So they found some doctors somewhere, some experts who would say that.
Okay.
And then Dr. Rodgers chooses to testify on his own behalf.
What an idiot.
Even though the defense feels strongly that he should not. So again, I do see narcissism all over that. On the stand, he denies that he had ever made a confession. He says the one that was signed by him, somebody else wrote that, and it was attributed to him. And they said, well, is this your signature? And he's like, yeah, that is my signature, but those papers must have been switched on me or something.
Okay.
And he denies everything that's been testified by Peggy and Barry. He says he didn't give them keys to the house. He didn't ask them to rob and rape his wife. He didn't know anything about the murder until he was called that morning at the grill. So obviously his details aren't lining up and his facts, and haven't really been the whole time. This was interesting. There was one doctor who testified for the prosecution, and he was the one testifying that the doctor didn't know right from wrong at the time of the murder. Mm-hmm. But he was nervous. It was his first trial that he had been as an expert in. And so the whole time he's given his testimony, he keeps using the word, sprinkled throughout his responses.
I do that too.
And they said to the point that it was distracting. And I laughed. I said, well, we can relate.
Yes.
Because they don't know how much we edit out of these things. And so's. And yeah. So I did laugh when I read that. Okay, so on Wednesday, March 19th. Dr. Rodgers was found guilty of murder in the first degree.
Good.
On Thursday, March the 20th, he was sentenced to life in prison.
Great.
Yep. 4 months later, Barry Kimbrell faces trial, and on July 23rd, 1975, he is convicted of first-degree murder.
Wonderful.
And he gets life in prison at age 33. I want to go on to say, in 1978, he made an escape from Cummins Prison Farm. But after 88 days, he was captured and returned to prison, and they added an extra 5 years to his sentence. And then he died of natural causes while in prison on May 2nd, 1992.
Okay. He was pretty young.
Yeah.
Okay.
On September 25th, Peggy was allowed to plead guilty to a reduced charge of second-degray murder. So she did get that dropped down. And so she was sentenced 21 years in prison. That in reality, that meant she may possibly only serve less than 6 of those years. And sure enough, on August 29th, 1980, Peggy, now age 27, received parole.
Oh my gosh.
And she was allowed to move to another state where she went on to get a job, get married, and start a family of her own.
And I believe that there was more evidence against her than there was the doctor.
I know. I mean, it was her gun.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, she got off easy on that one.
She got off. Yeah, that's crazy.
In January of 1976, Rodgers gets taken to trial again, this time for insurance fraud. So remember I mentioned earlier?
Yes.
That came full circle. And he was found guilty. And he started serving a 34-month sentence at a federal prison in Springfield. So he had been out. Okay, I need to back up. So he had been out on bond while waiting for an appeal to his sentence.
Oh.
He has filed an appeal.
Okay.
And then they got him for insurance fraud. So he had to start serving that sentence while he's waiting for this appeal to go through.
Okay.
He had been getting friends and family to come in and be seen for, illnesses they didn't have.
Right.
And then they were filing insurance for it.
Yes.
But later his appeal for the murder trial was denied. He actually filed a petition. He claimed an error had been made in the judgment against him. Now he says that Detective Lester had written the confession for him.
Oh my God.
And had gotten Rodgers to sign it by putting narcotics in his food.
Oh, okay.
And using signs that were only known to the Fraternal Order of Masons.
Oh, that's what
they were both Masons, and so he was giving him these signals and talking him into
Gotcha.
On January 5th, 1979, the Arkansas Attorney General's office filed a response to that, basically stating that those allegations were subject to question. And that response was submitted by none other than Attorney General Bill Clinton.
Oh, wow. Okay.
2 years after that, in 1980, Dr. Porter Roland Rodgers, Sr., age 76, died after being admitted to a hospital from Cummins Prison in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. That happened to be the same day that Ronald Reagan was elected president.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Rodgers is buried in Cleveland County, Arkansas, with a tombstone that reads, "An exceptional man."
What a horrific end to a life that could have been so much better. I mean, it sounds like he was smart and just, I don't know, could have made such a difference. And
he had the perfect family.
Yeah, what a horrible end.
Yeah, and his son was a doctor, and his son and daughter had to live the rest of their lives having lost their mother and knowing that their dad had, gotten up with this young girl and done this horrible thing. And it's all very sad.
Very sad. Wow. Those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
In the introduction, I mentioned the fictional town Stars Hollow. Now I added the word town. The original text said the fictional Stars Hollow. And the first thing I thought when I read that was, what the crap does that mean? It's gotta be a typo. It didn't make any sense at all. So I Googled it. Apparently, Stars Hollow is the name of the town from the show The Gilmore Girls. The Gilmore Girls is an anti-type to Hard Times and True Crimes. They both featured two girls and a guy. But at Hard Times and True Crimes, we're smart, and they're not. My jokes and sarcasm are hilarious and right on time. They've structured an entire show around failed, sarcastic punchlines. Now, my niece is the only person I know that watches the Gilmore Girls. She's 17, wrecked her car 3 times, and can't get a boyfriend. Coincidence? I don't think so. So you make sure you like and subscribe to Hard Times and True Crimes. Buy the girls a coffee, just not from Luke's. And tell everybody you know, unless they watch the Gilmore Girls, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.
Hey, Hard Times and True Crimes listeners. We wanted to give you a quick update. Life's been a little extra busy behind the scenes for Darlene and I. So for the next couple of months, we'll be switching to a bi-weekly release schedule. This means new episodes will drop every other Wednesday instead of every week. But don't worry, we're still bringing you the same historical cases that you love, just with a little more breathing room on our end. We'll be back to our weekly schedule in June. In the meantime, make sure you stay caught up on past episodes and stay connected with us in our Facebook group and on social media.